the slam dunk approach to vegetable gardening in Florida so that you can get growing right away with just enough to get you started, and then we'll go in depth on different resources to really get you gardening, and all in regards specifically to growing in Florida, because we are quite different than most of the country. All right, so let's see here. Just in case any of you haven't met me before or attended some of my other classes and workshops that I do around Pinellas County, my name is Elise Pickett, and I'm the owner of the Urban Harvest. I have been teaching Floridians how to vegetable garden now for a little over 7 years formally, but I have been gardening my whole life. I was lucky enough to have a father who loved to garden, so he got me started very young. And now I've been able to transition slowly into doing this full time. So I have been staying at home with my little munchkin there in the picture, as well as teaching you all how to grow organic and sustainable veggies here in Florida. And this is something that I think has really hit home of late. So with this coronavirus and everything that's going on and going around, I think we've all come to realize how short our supply chain really is. 99% of our food comes from thousands of miles away. And with the slightest disruption, the slightest hiccup, whether it's the driver's not driving, roads closed, borders closed, it can cause a major impact on the food that we typically have easy access to. I just did a video on victory gardens, and I think that it's just an incredibly fitting topic for right now. In the early 1940s, the United States government asked or requested its citizens to do their part in growing some of their own food. And the idea really caught on, and at its prime, there were over 20 million home gardens in the United States. And they produced 9 to 10 million tons of vegetables, which was about 40% of the food that was consumed in the United States during that time frame. So these people were not trained farmers. They were not, they had not gone to get any sort of formal education in agriculture. This was literally just pamphlets distributed by the government, talking to local gardeners in their area, joining community gardens. These were average citizens with no prior knowledge, and they were able to generate 40% of America's food growing in urban, suburban, and small rural lots, which to me is pretty amazing and powerful and inspiring that something like that could happen. And I don't think that we're putting this in perspective, but this kind of thing has been happening all over the world very frequently too. So when Cuba was going through their crisis and they got cut off from a lot of their resources, they created a system called orgopanicos. And basically they converted parking lots, vacant city lots, and they all came together as a community, and they pitched in and they grew a substantial amount of their own fresh food using just these abandoned city lots, and they were able to grow all of their food right there, local to each neighborhood. So it's kind of the same concept of the victory gardens, and that was just in the 1980s. So this is absolutely something that can be easily achieved in a very short time frame if people choose to do so. So here's a little information on the current industrial food system. And this is what got me personally into, I've always been gardening, but I did not always use an organic approach. And it wasn't ever with very much intention in mind. I just enjoyed being in the garden. But as an adult, I started learning a lot of these facts about the industrial food system. And the lack of nutrition in our food today is just mind-blowing. If we were to look back, an orange that our grandparents ate had enough vitamin C. Now, today, we have to eat 10 of those oranges to equate to that one orange's vitamin C that our grandparents ate. And that's because the nutrition and all of the nutrients in our soil are getting stripped away. When you add on top of that, the industrial food model of shipping food all over the country, When we have something that's cut in a field in California, sent to the processing plant, sent to the manufacturer, distributed to the grocery store, shipped across the country, sat in a grocery store here for a few weeks, and then it sat in your refrigerator for a week, what do you think that nutritional value is on that food? Probably not what we're expecting. So that's what really got me started personally in growing my own food. And a lot of people think that it's a broken system and that we can't do much about it. And I beg to differ. I think there is a ton of hope and a ton of inspiration out there. Just for an example, with just 50 acres, which is about the size of the Boston Commons, we could produce thousands and millions of pounds of food. And if it's done in a very intense manner, we can be creating jobs and we can be reducing our carbon footprint. So I think there's a tremendous amount of hope and value to growing our own food and changing the industrial model that we currently have. So here's a little quote. I did have my degree in wildlife ecology and conservation. So Aldo Leopold is kind of infamous in the wildlife management perspective. And he said, "We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." So that is absolutely the approach to gardening that I take. It's letting nature do its work, working with her, not against her, and it's so much more successful and easy and rewarding when you work with her instead of against her. So the bulk of our topic today is going to be the 4 S's: sun, soil, seed, and season. As for the 4 S's, I feel like that is the easiest way to get started quickly. And it's the basic fundamentals for vegetable gardening that anybody needs to know, regardless of living in Florida or elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world. But I will be tailoring our talk to Florida specifically. The first of the 4 S's is sun. Sunlight is one of those things, once you set up your garden, unless you're container gardening, which we will talk a little bit about, it's something that you can't easily correct or change. And in general, veggies, it's said that they need 8 hours of sunlight a day. That's like kind of the golden standard for most of the US. Here in Florida, that is not the case. Depending on the veggies, of course, 8 hours of sunlight will burn most of our plants, especially if we're coming into the spring and summer months like we are now. When we're in fall and winter, the weather's a little bit cooler and more mild. They can potentially get 8 hours of sun, but when we're growing, heading into our hot season, 8 hours is far too much. The general guideline or time frame for Florida is actually 4 to 6 hours. So anything that needs 6 hours is going to be your fruiting vegetables. So think tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, anything that is producing a visible fruit, and the fruit is what we're harvesting. Leafy greens and root vegetables tend to need closer to 4 hours. So if you just kind of keep that in mind when you're determining where you want to place your garden, or if some of your beds have less sun and some have a little bit more, you can kind of do your garden plans according to that general guidance. Now, for Florida specific, a lot of people say they don't have enough sun in their yard, and for some people that may be true. They may have literally the entire yard covered in oak trees. But most people have at least 4 hours of sunlight somewhere in their yard, even if it's on a few pots on the edge of their driveway or a sunny windowsill that faces the south. Even if it's not outside, you absolutely can grow plants indoors. So you should have something somewhere to get your garden or herbs started. In general, morning sun is ideal. So if you were to picture yourself going out in the morning, it's pleasant. You can get to your car to go to work without dripping sweat. In the afternoon though, 5 p.m., heat of the day, it is crazy hot and will drip sweat the whole time. Plants are just like us. So if you have a location that does not have full sun, morning sun is actually ideal. So typically that's going to be on the west side of your lot. So if you were to picture the sun rising, it's going to rise from the east, right? So that's going to provide light to the west side of your garden. As the sun rises and sets in the west, it's going to be putting most of that sun towards the east side of the garden. So considering the different locations in your yard and what sunlight they get, not just looking at it as 4 to 6 in general, try to find a location that actually has more morning sun than afternoon. Now, the morning and afternoon sun is not a hard and fast rule. It's just ideal. If you can determine that, it's an ideal scenario. If you only have a location that gets afternoon sun, that's okay too. You'll just have to consider that when you're looking at what plant varieties you want to grow. All right, so that kind of is the gist of the sun section. So I'm gonna wait just a second, see if anybody has any specific questions in regards to sunlight in your vegetable garden, because it is one of those things that we can't alter, especially when we do built-in beds or planters or anything like that. So I really want to make sure everybody's comfortable and confident on that topic. Okay. Stacy asked, is there anything I can grow on east-west facing porches? I live in a townhome. Absolutely. So I would probably choose the east facing porch as long as it has about 4 hours of sunlight a day. That will give them that morning sun. Balconies work too. The only balcony that's not ideal, or window if you're growing inside the house and not outside, the only side that's not ideal for growing some sort of veggie or herb is the north side. In most cases, the north side of your yard or house or window is not going to be enough sun. Now, my garden actually is on the north side, but it's not close to the house. So in the winter, I do get a little bit more shade than I'd like, but it was my sunniest spot in the garden. So I did choose to put it on the north side. It's just far enough away from the house that I can still get a significant amount of light beyond the house shadow, if that makes sense to everybody. So we talked a little bit about not finding enough sun, but if you have too much sun, there's a few things you can do to combat that. If you have too much sun in your garden, you can look to shade trees or fence lines. Fence lines do offer that afternoon shade. Once you get beyond noon, 1 o'clock, the sun will start dipping low enough in the sky that planting along fence lines usually works really well for getting some afternoon relief. The other thing too is if you really need to, you can always do a shade cloth. It's a little bit more cost up front. My last house that I lived at, there was in a great spot for it, and it was a full sun location all day that didn't have too many mature trees. And I ended up just putting up shade cloth, and that makes a significant difference. And the other perk about shade cloths is you can remove it if you need to in the winter months and just leave it up during the summer. So definitely a nice thing to have, but it is an added expense. So you kind of just have to weigh that out. All right, let me just make sure northwest is fine. So it's the opposite. So the sun rises in the east, so it's going to be offering sun in the morning time to plants on the west side of your yard. As the sun peaks and sets, it's going to be in the west and offering sun to the east side of the yard. So if you think about whatever position the sun is in, it's going to be going across your yard, right? Except for at high noon or whatnot when it's right overhead. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the sun for now, and Liz will be trying to answer those questions specifically, but if anything doesn't get answered, I am going to go back through and get everybody's questions answered at the end. I just don't wanna, I wanna be respectful of everybody's time that they've committed to this webinar, so I do wanna stay on track for that. So I will, as long as you guys hang out, I will be answering the questions towards the end. All right, so we've covered the sun out of the 4 S's. Now we're moving on to soil. And soil is absolutely critical. If you spend money or time in any area, it needs to be on the soil. Because, okay, so I like to give the analogy, if we've been working crazy hard hours and we haven't been eating well, we've been doing takeout food, we haven't been drinking enough water because we've been on the go, you know, we haven't taken our vitamins because we've forgotten, our body wears down. And we're way more likely to get sick when we're run down like that. Plants are the same way. They get their nutrition and all of their needs from the soil. That's where it all starts. That's their vitamins. That's the heart and soul of where the plants get all of their nutrition. And so if we spend time building good soil, then the plants are set up for success. If you have properly amended and healthy organic soil, you're going to have less pests, you're going to have more production, less disease and fungal issues. So if you take the time to set up the soil, you will have way less problems down the line. Now, how do we set up our soil? In the perfect world, we would have a gigantic pile of compost that we could use to build our beds. Most people don't have that kind of setup. I was a little, I do this for a living, so I was a little crazy. We just actually purchased a new home. Well, not just anymore, but we purchased it last July in the middle of the summer. And so I knew, of course, that I was going to have a lot of gardens, but I wasn't going to plant right in the middle of summer. So I took the time and I did over 9 yards of compost, a giant compost pile. It was like half the backyard. It was pretty ridiculous. But I knew that's what I wanted to do. And when the compost was finished, I had about 3 yards of homemade compost that I was able to do my beds with. And I do have a video on that process. I do have, and Liz will be sending out links. And also too, there is going to be a follow-up email with a huge list of resources and links to videos and different topics that we've covered today, so that it goes more in depth for you. So that will be in the follow-up email as well. But anyhow, so I was able to use that for my beds, but I know most people are not in that situation at all. And especially right now when we're wanting to get growing quickly. So in almost every case, we're going to want to do bulk soil. A lot of people may want to run to Home Depot and get a bag or two of soil, or 10 or 20 bags of soil if you're trying to do a raised bed. If you're literally only doing a couple of pots and, you know, it only needs 2, 3, 4 bags. 4 bags is pretty much the cutoff on whether it's economical to purchase by bag versus bulk soil where they deliver it to you. So if you're getting 4 bags or less, then yes, okay, go buy the bag soil from Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, and it's fine. If you've got more than that, I would highly recommend looking into a bulk soil delivery. It seems like it would not be cost effective, but the price point is there. The delivery fee in the bulk soil is just so cheap compared to bag soil that it makes sense. So go ahead and call your local landscaper in your area and ask them for a quote. Just tell them, you know, my garden bed is this by this and this high, you know, length, width, height, and they'll tell you exactly how much soil you need. And yeah, it's almost always cheaper. So definitely do the research and at least give them a call to get a quote. So we're gonna ask them for the best soil they have. Tell them you're doing the gardening stuff. They're gonna give you a nice topsoil, maybe a depending on the location, sometimes they'll have like an actual gardening mix. Go ahead, get that. But caveat, even their best soil is not going to be perfect. If you get a good quality soil, it'll have a nice humusy organic matter to it. It'll smell like soil. It will be a little bit crumbly, not too much sand. It'll kind of, if you squeeze it, it'll kind of hold together a little bit. It won't just like sift right through your hands. That's a sign that you have some good loam or good structure to your soil. But in almost every case, it's not going to be very high in nutrients. So that's where amending the soil comes in. And like I said, you know, yes, it's a cost. Yes, you can grow without doing this, but you're going to be battling things down the line. So the cost comes somewhere. So just getting it fixed in the beginning to me is highly recommended. So when you're amending your soil, my number one absolute go-to is worm castings. Worm castings, one, add nitrogen, which is the nutrients that plants need to get growing. It's really well balanced. It will not burn your plants at all. You can add as much or as little of it as you want. And a little bit does go a long way with worm castings. It also jumpstarts the microbial life in your garden. So a lot of times the soil you get from bulk retailers has been disturbed a lot. It's maybe not the highest quality compost. When you add worm castings, it's getting all of that microbial and bacterial action that's supposed to be in our soils kickstarted. Worm castings are basically worm poop. And just like we have good gut buddies in our stomachs, they have good gut buddies in theirs. So by them processing all of the soil and turning it into castings for us, we get all of those bacteria and microbial life put into the garden bed for us so that they can then start reproducing and making a whole big happy soil ecosystem. So worm castings are a wonderful soil amendment, one that I would highly recommend. And if I only got to add one thing, it would be that. There are a lot of other things you can add to your soil. You can do kelp meal's a nice one. It has a growth hormone that plants, because kelp is seaweed, it's got a growth hormone in that helps the vegetables grow bigger and stronger and faster. So that's a lovely amendment. You can add things like bone meal or potash, or it just depends on what the soil needs. And a little, I like to take the kitchen sink, or the, you know, where you toss in everything. It's like grandma's soup pot. Like what's in the fridge? I don't know, a tomato, a carrot, a celery. I'll just put it all in the soup, right? So a little bit of everything is great, but if you don't have the resources available to you to do all of these little things, just stick with bulk soil and worm castings, and it will take you a very, very long way. And you can slowly add amendments in as the seasons progress. So maybe next season you throw in a little kelp meal, and then the season after that, you might throw in a little bit of bone meal, and then the season after that, you might, so and on it goes. And you can just kind of tweak and grow your soil. And hopefully maybe you might even have compost to add to the soil after a couple of seasons. And composting is a critical part of closing the loop and making our food system a little bit more sustainable. So composting is not hard. A lot of people fear it. It's something that can easily be done. And the very basic gist of it is a 50-50 mix of veggies to brown matter. I do have a video that's going to be going out in the resources links that goes in depth on composting. It's just a little much to explain here, but I will just encourage everybody to at least consider composting, whether it's on a small scale or a large scale. Even if you're in an apartment, you can always do worm castings in your closet. I mean, there's a way for everybody to get a little bit of compost made. So just something to consider, and make sure to check the resources page that we send out for more details on that. We've covered so far sun and soil. Now we're going to be moving into seeds of the 4 S's. And I think that a lot of people kind of like give me a little pushback for emphasizing seed so much. And there are a tremendous amount of benefits to using seed instead of plant starts when you're gardening. And we're going to talk about that. But I think that now more than ever, when we've had these disruptions in our lives and our resources that are available to us, if we're, you know, if they lock us down, or if we can't get to the store, or if the supply chain gets disrupted and they can't ship the plant starts from Georgia to Florida, whatever the case, seeds, one, they can be mailed, so they can be delivered to your door. And 2, they save. So someone had a question about, do seeds expire? The answer is kind of, but not really. So seeds in general, and it does depend on how they're stored and everything like that, but they lose about 5% germination a year. So not every seed's going to germinate every time, even if it's super fresh, high quality seed. You're usually looking at 90 to 95% germination rate on most seeds. So if you use them for the next year, for the following season, it'll probably be 90 instead of 95. If it's 2 years old, it might be 85. And then after that, it might be 80. So seeds save when a lot of other things are, if things are up in the air, you know that you can always rely on the seed packets from last season. You may have to plant a little bit extra, maybe 2 or 3 per hole, just to make sure you get all your germination that you were hoping for. But you can't do that with the plant starts. So I always talk to people about using seed, and it's really not as intimidating to start from seed as most people would think. So let's delve into this a little bit more. They are always accessible, which I kind of just covered. And it's also much more cost effective. So especially with organic gardening, people say, okay, well, what's the cost of me going to the grocery store? And I think most of us here, at least in today's situation, have moved past what's the grocery store comparison. But let's say everything settles down, turns back to normal, which it will eventually. And we have easy access to vegetables at the grocery store. We have to consider cost when we're growing this food. Yes, there are tremendous benefits to spending time in the garden for stress and mental health and physical health. There's a ton of studies out there that show that you live longer and all sorts of amazing things that the garden can provide for you. But setting that aside, if we're looking at it just from a cost perspective, when you're buying a $4 start per plant to plant into your vegetable garden, and you may only get, so like broccoli, for example, it's mostly just a one head of broccoli and then the plant is done. It's not like leafy greens where you can keep harvesting it, right? So if we bought a $4 broccoli start and we can get it from the grocery store for $2, is that worth it? Probably not. But if we start it from seed, and we have a pack of seeds that cost $3 and we can plant 50 or 100 broccoli for that cost, then it makes sense to grow your own food. So saving seed can save you a ton of money. There's differences and there's times and occasions when the starts might be fitting. If it's a perennial and you know that once you buy it, you won't have to plant it again, great, buy a start. If it's a little late in the season and you really want to grow tomatoes, so like right now, we're kind of flip-flopped, and we're going to get into seasonality in a second, but we're kind of flip-flopped. So tomatoes grow best in winter and spring here, fall, winter, spring. So we're into the tail end of our tomato season. You can still put starts into the ground right now. Now is an ideal time to put in the plant starts, but as far as starting seed, it is far too late. It is too late to start tomato seed. So in that case, maybe buying a start or two could be beneficial. But in almost all cases, we want to consider seed. One of the other huge perks to starting from seeds is the variety. So when you go to a big box store, you might have 10 peppers to choose from, 10 different varieties of peppers. When you look at an online seed catalog or a mail order seed catalog, you'll probably have 50 to 100 different options of seeds for a vegetable. Whereas in the store, you'll probably have, 10. So why does that matter? Seed, we've lost about 80% of our seed diversity because of the industrial food system. They picked crops for shippability, ripening all at one time, pest resistance. They didn't select for flavor or microclimates. And that's really where the emphasis comes in is if you spend the time to do a little bit of research on heirloom varieties, you can find things that grow really, really well here in Florida that may not do well in the rest of the country. So we're going to talk about zones in a second, but the zones are very broad. So let's take, for example, I'm in St. Pete, Tampa Bay area. We're growing zone 9B, kind of the border of 10. And, but so is California. And California has super dry summers. They're wet in the winter and dry in the summer. We're dry in the winter and wet in the summer. So planting the same varieties of veggies in California that you do in Florida is not going to usually set the plant up for success. So when we're able to really fine tune our seed selection to the growing area, they're going to thrive and do better than if you were to be trying to force them to grow in conditions that aren't ideal for them. So if you take the datil pepper, for example, it's an heirloom variety of pepper. kind of similar to a habanero or something like that, like a nice spicy pepper, orange pepper. And that was developed on the East Coast, or selected for on the East Coast of Florida. So it knows our growing seasons, and it does exceptionally well here. Whereas you consider some of the peppers we might be more familiar with that are grown in like dry, arid desert regions, like in Mexico, for example, they're probably not going to thrive here because we're hot and we're humid. We're not dry. Okay. So that kind of allows you, by taking the time to learn your seed selections and seed varieties, it can really help you hone in on what does best in your area. And when you have something that grows well, that's just like going back to the nutrients in the soil. If we have really good nutrients and then we put it in a climate that it excels in, it's going to have less pest pressure and better production for you. So it's just putting all of your ducks in a row, right? Okay, so seasonality. We've set up our plants well. We've figured out the best sun for them. We've fed them, I guess you could say, quality soil. And we've selected plant varieties and seeds that do exceptionally well in our growing environments. Now we're on to seasons. We're just trying to set everything up that we can possible and weighing the scales in our favor. So seasonality is really important. And a lot of my clients that I work with, I do like classes and consultations and stuff, and they're from up north. They've gardened their entire lives successfully, and they move down here and they are just dismayed. They try growing for a season or two and they give up. And that's because oftentimes it's the seasons. We do have a lot of differences, especially with the soil. Like you can't just, plant, most crops will not thrive in our ground. We have to build and give them quality soil, but it's the seasons that really get people. And we're going to be covering that a little bit here. But if you do go, and this will be on my resources email that I send out to everybody, but if you go to my website, theurbanharvest.com, and you sign up for my newsletter, it's a monthly newsletter, but when you sign up, you do get a free what to plant when cheat sheet that is fine-tuned for Central Florida. So everybody from Southern Florida and even Northern Florida, you would just give and take a month probably, depending on the crop, maybe a month and a half as to when you would start the seed. So if you're in Southern Florida, you would start seed earlier. If you're in North Florida, you would start seed later than that chart. It is fine-tuned for Central Florida, but it literally will go through and say, it's March. What can I plant in March? Which, by the way, is almost everything. This is a great time to start your garden because you can plant the tail end of most of your winter crops and start planting for spring, summer crops. So great time to start. So anyhow, South Florida, you would just plant a little bit later. So if that makes sense, North Florida a little later, Southern Florida a little bit earlier. And you can get growing. So the chart will tell you it's March, what you can plant, or I want to grow tomatoes, when should I plant the seed? So that's a great quick guide that you can reference. And it's hard to keep it all straight. I do this for a living and I might know the general time frames, but I still check it once in a while just to be like, it's a little early to start, eggplants or whatever. No, I think I can do it. So good resource, and that's free, of course. So definitely sign up for that if you haven't already. Now let's delve into seasons. A lot of people think that Florida, if you've been gardening a little while or have talked to some folks, a lot of times people will tell you that we only grow in winter here. And that's not the case. If you choose to, yes, it's hotter. Yes, there's a little bit more bugs, but there are a ton of crops that grow straight through our summer months. And we're going to be covering some of those. Just because we are heading into that hot season. But you can grow year round, even leafy greens. And I'm hopefully going to be doing another webinar on that. I did have classes for that coming up, and of course they were canceled. So I will be trying to get something up on that. So just check out my event page on Facebook if you want to make sure you're stayed in the loop on more webinars. I'll do the growing leafy greens year round soon. Anyhow, okay, so we are going to be talking about growing year round. You can do it. You just have to plan accordingly and know that you're going to be changing out your crops. No, you cannot grow spinach in summer. Will not grow well, but you can grow things like tatsoi or New Zealand spinach through our warm, hot winter months. So just know that you can grow year round. You do not have to shut your garden down unless you choose to and you don't want to be out in the heat, and that's fine too. I would suggest, if you don't want to garden over the summer, that you at least plant what's called a cover crop. And I have a video on that will be sent out with the resource page, some good cover crops for Florida. And basically what that does is that it covers the soil so that it's not baking in the heat, because we're trying to build basically a soil ecosystem. And when it sits there and gets beat on by the sun, it strips away all the nutrients, it kills off all the good bacteria and the good microbial action that's going on. It also, with our heavy rains, will deplete your soil of the nutrients very quickly. It compacts the soil. There's a ton of negative effects to just leaving bare soil. Basically, you always want something planted in the soil. So cover crops are nice because they do exceptionally well. And you can do cover crops for winter or summer. If you're from, Canada and you're going to be gone and you won't be here for the summer growing season, plant a cover crop. Things like sweet potatoes, cowpeas, they'll all cover the soil. They don't need any maintenance from you once they're established, and our summer rains start. That's plenty of rain for them. And so you basically plant it and leave it and forget about it until you go back in the fall to plant your fall garden, and then you can harvest it and then move on from there. So definitely consider cover crops in winter or summer. It works for both. There's different crops for both, but just make sure to keep your soil covered. Okay, so growing zones. Like I referenced earlier, just because we're in zone 9B does not mean that we have these same growing conditions as the rest of the country. So just keep that in mind. I really, truly, highly recommend finding somebody that's very local to you, joining a community gardening organization. I know I'm in St. Pete. We have the Sustainable Urban Agriculture Coalition, which is a wonderful, it's basically a meetup of gardeners, and they have a speaker come in once a month, but there's a ton of gardening clubs and gardening organizations all over the state and the country. And those are going to be people that are growing in your exact conditions. You can swap ideas, trade seeds, and really get a fine-tuned look at the seasonality in your area. So if you're just starting out, these people are going to be super excited to help you get started. So look in your area for a local gardening club to join, because they're going to be a lot more refined than just looking at a growing zone online. Although there are online resources as well. So your local universities, so if we're all growing in Florida, University of Florida IFAS Extension Center has a center in each county that is county-specific information. And they'll tell you, they can help you answer questions like what's eating my plant, or they can look at different varieties, and they have all sorts of really wonderful resources. So definitely check into that. But they're going to be just so much more refined than looking at those broad charts. So definitely don't just think in terms of growing zone. And the last part of this seasonality perspective is thinking outside of the box. So like I referenced earlier, you can grow, so a lot of people, let's just take leafy greens, for example. I'm a really big proponent of growing your leafy greens. They don't take up as much space as a lot of the other crops. You can succession plant them and grow a ton in a small space, and they lose their nutrients really, really quickly. So spinach, for example, loses 90% of its vitamin C within the first 24 hours of harvest. So if something's going cross country, it's got no nutrients by the time it gets to you. So things that are harder bodied, they lose their nutrients much slower. So like a potato is not going to lose its nutrients as quickly. So in my opinion, I grow a ton of leafy greens because that's going to give me the most benefits of being able to harvest it fresh, right? Because I can go out and pick my salad or my smoothie and then use it right away when I get peak nutrients. So thinking outside of the box. Lettuces. You can't grow lettuces, true lettuces like your romaines and your bibs and all of those, red leaf and all of those. They don't grow in summer heat. Some of them can kind of grow in our spring and fall months on the border, the cusp, but in general, they don't grow through our summer months for at least a third of the year, if not more. So what do you do in that off season? Well, you look at alternatives. So things that aren't necessarily from our area, but they have similar conditions that grow well. So one of my favorite leafy greens to grow as a like curb season crop is tatsoi. Tatsoi, T-A-T-S-O-I, is an Asian leafy green. It's very similar to spinach, but it's technically in the bok choy family. It's got a little bit of a thicker stem, but you can literally substitute it for any dish that calls for spinach and no one will ever know. And it's super pest resistant and really easy to grow. A lot of the industrial ag people have actually started growing tatsoi. So more than likely, you've probably had tatsoi in, like, you know, the boxed mixes from the grocery store. You've probably had it and not even known it and just thought it was spinach. It's that similar. So that's a wonderful crop to grow here in our spring and fall months. It doesn't mind the warmth so much. It will eventually bolt and it'll get too hot for it midsummer. But it's a great curb season crop. So what about the depths of summer, when even the tatsoi doesn't want to grow? What leafy greens can we grow then? We can grow, a lot of people don't know, sweet potato leaves, which you can use as a cover crop. The tender tips are actually edible. You can saute those up like a leafy green. Another one of my absolute favorites to grow is amaranth. And that is just a multi-use crop. One, it grows through our summer months with zero hesitation. It does not mind the heat one bit. So you can use the small leaves, the new growth, as a raw salad or smoothie mix. You can eat it raw. It's nice and tender. If the leaves get larger and you didn't pick them, they can be used for a cooking green, so they can be sauteed, or you can use them as like a pressure cooker or boil, like an alternative to collard greens or something like that. So those are a little bit more tough, but still flavorful and good. You can use those. The other benefit is that it produces gorgeous flower heads. So you have these beautiful blooms that you can leave out and enjoy in the garden. You can cut and bring inside. Or if you do leave it on the stalk in the garden, once the blooms dry out and die off, you can have a harvestable grain. And I like to call it the warm weather quinoa. And so the seed heads produce seeds, the flower heads produce seeds. And when they're dry, you can actually harvest that and eat it as a grain. It's kind of the size of a couscous. It doesn't look like quinoa. It's a little smaller, but it's a whole grain that you can grow through our summer months. So it's just a wonderful multi-use crop. Amaranth is also called pigweed. It's considered a weed by most, but in my opinion, I kind of take a little bit of a permaculture approach, but weeds aren't such a bad thing because they thrive. They grow without much care. And isn't that kind of what we're aiming for anyhow? So that's a little bit of a perspective on thinking outside the box. Like I said, reaching out to some of those local gardening, joining a community garden, getting a plot at a community garden, even if you can't grow at home, has its benefits. You're going to have people that are growing things. You can see what's growing in other people's garden beds. It'll give you a great idea on that. So just reaching out to some of those local resources in the IFAS Extension Center. I mean, the IFAS is so good. You can literally send them an email of a picture of a plant you can't identify or bug on your garden, and they will respond to you. You don't even have to bring it into the actual office. So wonderful resource. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, I would just say that it's never going to be perfect the first time. In our society, everything is so focused on getting those A pluses in everything we do, and we want it to be perfect the first time. And yes, we do have a lot of information available to us right now, but it can also almost cause like an analysis paralysis. So my approach is a ready, fire, aim. So get ready. You know, you don't want to just try, although eventually you will figure it out. Get a little resource, get a little resources available to you, and just start. Give it a shot. Give it your best planting effort, and then learn from it and refine it for the next season. It's not going to be perfect from the get-go, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just jump in, get started, and learn as you go, because that's kind of part of gardening. I've been doing this literally my whole life, and I've doing professionally now for almost 10 years, and I still have failures. You know, one year there might be a pest pressure, or if I'm gardening in a new location, I have a demonstration garden and I started gardening. There's always going to be curveballs. You're never going to get it right every single time, and it's all good. You're still doing your part. You're still growing nutrient-dense food. You're still getting all the mental and physical benefits of being in a vegetable garden or growing some of your own food. So, you know, don't expect perfection. And especially if you're growing with organic and sustainable concepts in mind, it's never going to be perfect. And that's all right. All right, so we're going to be moving on. I have a little quote by Audrey Hepburn, and it says, "To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow." This is an incredibly overwhelming and uncertain and maybe even scary time that we're dealing with right now. There's just so much confusion. But I think that taking this moment or time frame that we're experiencing right now, and that we're likely heading into this peaceful time, it can be peaceful if we choose to make it that way. So take this quiet period to learn something new and to delve in and center yourself and find what you've been missing. Because even though it is different, and even though it may not be easy or seemingly beneficial, we can get something out of this useful and productive and calming. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I had to cancel so many courses, and I know that everybody has the time right now, and I think this wake up call that we've all had with our industrial food system has been eye-opening for many. So I'm going to do a vegetable garden intensive. So normally I've been doing in my local area like an in-person 4-month workshop where we go over different gardening concepts in depth to get everybody growing, but we kind of don't have the time right now. So I'm going to do this intensive. These are the topics we're going to be covering. And basically I'm going to be setting it up as a 45-minute, we're going to meet at 7:30 each evening for 2 weeks. So from 7:30 to 8:15, we're going to go over each of these topics in depth and really refine it. We're going to start on Wednesday, since everybody seems to kind of be slowing down and finally getting to the point where we're all mostly staying from home, working from home, or whatnot. So we'll start Wednesday, 7:30 to 8:15 p.m. each night for 2 weeks to cover all of these topics. And that's basically to hopefully get you 100% ready to grow and get all of that information. If you're hesitant or overwhelmed or really want to strive for that perfection, this will give you the information you need to get started. I also do have, as long as the post offices don't change significantly, I do have a mail order seed club for Florida gardeners. So I mail out 3 different varieties of in-season seed each month. It's mailed directly to your door. And it comes with seed success cards, which tell you all of the planting information you need, when to plant it based on actual Florida growing seasons, not, the general country regs or, zone 9B stuff. I have it refined to our area. And it'll give you planting tips, harvesting techniques, even cooking ideas and how to use it. So if you're interested in that, we'll have links for that as well. You can join the club. And we also do have an online community, a private Facebook group where we can interact, ask questions, look at people's progress with their different varieties that they're doing, things that they may have tried. So it's been a really fun thing that we've had going now for about a year, and everybody's really been loving it. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is I do weekly YouTube videos. This is, of course, 100% free, and it is knowledge based on Florida gardening, Florida vegetable gardening. I do a different topic every single week, anything from what's eating my squash to composting 101 to top 10 heirloom tomato varieties to grow in Florida. I have over 50 different videos, and I've only been doing this now for a few months. So more coming at least weekly, maybe more frequently now that we have a little bit more slow time and the urgency is there for most. So definitely go ahead and subscribe on YouTube and check out some of those videos, and they can help get you jump started. And I also have a recommended reading list, different products that I found really helpful in the garden. If you're local to St. Pete, I do have a local resources like where you can source quality lumber or bulk soil, that kind of thing, growing supplies. I have all of that on the website, theurbanharvest.com. And normally I teach classes, workshops, and consultations. I do private one-on-one consultations, but I also do virtual consultations. So I use WhatsApp, and we use a video call so that I can see your garden and what you're working with, and we can do one-on-one for that. So if you have any specific questions you answered, whether you need a full in-depth, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, help me get a garden plan, we can spend an hour on the phone if you need and getting you set up, or we can do a quick 2-minute call to answer that one specific question. It's $1 a minute. So if it's a 2-minute call, it's $2. And if it's a 60-minute call, it's $60. So that's something that you can book online, or you can email me directly. So that's it for today's talk. I really appreciate you all taking your time today to learn a little bit more about Florida vegetable gardening. I hope this was helpful. When you do leave, you're going to be given a survey. This is my first webinar. I usually teach in-person classes, so I'd really value your feedback on that, just so I can improve for future webinars. So if you have the time, definitely appreciate that. And then we will be sending out that follow-up email within 24 hours that gives you a link to all of the resources we've discussed today. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm now going to head over to the question and answer box, and I'm just going to start verbally answering some of these questions, and we will get through all of them, I promise. So thank you all for coming out. If you need to tune out, go for it. If you want to hang out and get these questions answered, just hang out with me, and have a beautiful day. Thanks for coming. All right, so we have someone who said, I understand this will focus on growing in the normal way in the ground, but for those of us in apartments who are forced to garden in containers. I did not talk about that much, and I apologize for that. My intention was to, and I just kind of glossed over it. So a few tips for growing in containers. Growing in containers is great. You can follow the sun, and you don't have a lot of the soil-borne pathogens like nematodes that grow in our soil. So growing in containers is a great way to grow. I will say that when you grow in containers, you are going to have to be more mindful on nutrients and water. So nutrients and water. Because they cannot expand the root system as much as the plants in the ground, they will need more constant attention in water as well as nutrients, because they're going to move through it quicker. So you may have to do a mid-season fertilizer pick-me-up, even if you do soil amendments in the beginning, just because typically you're going to have a lot more stuff growing in a smaller space. So hope that was helpful. If not, you can add a specific question below. Okay, so someone asked, let's see, the length of sun for flowering vegetables. Yeah, so we're going to want to do more sun, closer to 6 hours for flowering fruiting vegetables. So let me look around the garden. So tomatillos, peppers, tomatoes, let's see, blueberries, broccoli, all of those are going to need eggplants. All of those are going to need more sun. Things that we're harvesting for the leaves, so the tatsoi, the amaranth, the lettuces and leafy greens, all of your root vegetables, your radish and carrots. Also cucumbers would be more of the fruiting. I didn't mention that. Watermelon, they like way more sun. Closer to the 6 hour mark, but all of the leafy vegetables or the root crop vegetables can tolerate closer to 4. And that's a give and take. It's not going to be, you don't have to find a location that only has 4 hours for leaves and has to have 6 hours for fruiting. That's just like a, working with the garden space. So if you know something's going to get a little more shade, you might keep that in mind. All right, so let's see. So someone asked about fungal disease because they have a lot of moisture in the garden. There's a few things you can do. If you're getting powdery mildew, I have a video on my YouTube channel that talks about how you can treat powdery mildew using a milk mixture. Works really effectively and helps get rid of all of those fungal issues. But to prevent them from ever happening, mulching goes a really long way. Watering the soil and not the plants helps tremendously. Making sure to water in the morning and not the afternoon so that they have time to dry out before they sit all night in the dark. All of this can help control fungal issues without any cost. All right, so somebody mentioned that they have the ability to access horse manure. I don't recommend using horse manure at all. It sucks because it's a readily available resource. And there's a caveat. If you know your farmer or the owner and you know the feed that they're using is quality, then go for it. It's wonderful soil amendment nitrogen wise. But a lot of times what they feed those poor horses is laced with pesticides. And those pesticides 100% will transfer all the way through the horse's system and into your garden soil and into your plants. They've shown study after study of growing plants in pesticide-laced feed will stunt plants and can even cause them not to grow at all. So definitely know your source on that before you do use that. All right, so let's see, chicken manure, since we're on the manure kick. Chicken manure is a wonderful soil amendment or a nitrogen source. Do not add it directly to the garden. Make sure you put it through a composting process first. If you do the composting process first, then it's gorgeous stuff for the garden, but it is too hot to add to the garden right away. And composting, it could just be tucking it in the corner of your yard for a few months and letting it break down, or it can be throwing it into an actual compost pile. All right, let's see here. We got that. Earth boxes. Yeah, I used to grow in earth boxes. They're great, convenient, easy to water. I have no complaints with them at all. I grow on a larger scale now, so it's just not economical for me to use, you know, a ton of earth boxes. But if you're looking at just 1 or 2 containers for a patio or something, it could be an absolutely great fit. And there's off brands now. When I first started using the earth boxes, there was only like that one brand and they were kind of pricey. There's alternatives now and they all do the same thing. So you don't have to get brand name if you choose not to. Let's see here. Best way from keeping dogs digging everything up. Raised beds, some sort of fencing. The deterrence there, sorry, I'm gonna move to the shade, guys. It's getting a little toasty over here. Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. So yeah, planting things denser, they're usually going for the soil, not the plants themselves. So planting things a little bit closer together can deter them as well. All right, let's see. Where can you buy kelp meal and bone meal? I sent out a product resource list. When I send out that page, it'll have the recommended products. You can also get it on my website. You can mail order them, which might be ideal right now, but I really encourage everybody, especially now more than ever, to shop local when you can. If you're local to St. Pete, Avid, AVID Brewing, it sounds like it's a beer. It is part brewery, but they started as a gardening store and they're still open till 5 p.m. every day. And they have a ton of gardening resources and they're actually cheaper than Amazon. But that being said, if you aren't in the area or you don't want to venture out at this time, shopping online, you can find almost all of that stuff online. And as a favor or a request, if you do click through the links on my website, I do get credit for that at no additional cost to you. So it just kind of helps support what I'm doing. All right, so let's see. We answered the composite question. We answered that. Let's see here. Okay, questions are coming in quick. So as far as killing weeds under your garden beds, I suggest a sheet mulching approach. So that can be, you don't have to kill the weeds at all. You don't even have to till the soil. I'm going to be doing a sheet mulching in-depth video soon, but there are a lot of resources online as well. But basically, you lay down cardboard and then a very thick sheet of mulch on top of it, 6 to 8 inches minimum. And by doing that, it just basically blocks out the weeds long enough for them not to keep growing. And then your garden bed's on top and it does great. I did my yard and I can turn it around, but I sheet mulched my full yard 9 months ago, and I don't have any weeds popping up. I don't know if you can really tell on the video quality, but 0 weeds. And it's been 9 months without any sort of pesticide or anything to kill them underneath. Just that sheet mulching approach. Okay. White flies, you can use neem oil. I'm going to be going in depth on that on the intensive. I don't use neem oil all the time, only in emergency situations. But white flies, Sounds crazy, but if you have a shop vac, you can actually literally just shop vac them off your plants. So you just turn the vacuum on and go and suck the leaves, and the white flies get caught in there and they're removed. You'll probably have to do it a few times because the eggs are going to be on there and everything like that. That's where a lot of people feel like it's not working, so they give up. But and this goes with almost any organic pesticide, not all of them, but you're not going to get all life stages with one go. So you have to go back maybe 2-3 times until you get all of those eggs and larvae and that kind of thing. So that's a tip for white flies. All right, so let's see here. Is it beneficial to have a greenhouse in Florida? No, not really. Maybe in North Florida, for sure in North Florida, it can be beneficial, but in Central and Southern Florida, there's no benefits to it. You, if anything, would want to do a shade house, not a greenhouse. Greenhouses keep heat in, and shade houses keep heat away. So just keep, even in our Florida winters, it's just, there's plenty of crops to grow that can do just fine in our cold. Okay, let's see. I think we're getting closer. Cow manure depends. I would put it in the same category as horse and goat the same way. If you know the farmer's feed, it's totally fine to use. It's wonderful stuff. If you do not know the farmer, where they're sourcing their feed from, I'd be suspicious. And that goes for all of the livestock. Chickens don't fall into that category because they're not eating the hay and the straw like the cows and all of that are. Okay. Okay, got the gardening questions answered for containers. Nematodes. Nematodes in the soil, in the raised beds, potentially solarizing. With nematodes, there are beneficial nematodes, there are non-beneficial nematodes, there are a lot of companion plants that you can put into the soil. The more robust your soil health is, the more likely things are to stay in balance. So if we have a huge amount of nematodes in the soil, it's usually because it's sandy. They don't like rich soil. That's why they're in the ground and not as much into the garden bed. So amending your soil so that it's more loamy and rich can make a big difference. And then the natural balance of soil organisms in the soil will also help, and that improves by adding things like the worm castings that we talked about and things like that, and allowing the soil to be undisturbed as much as possible. That kind of allows that thriving ecosystem to develop. Okay. Also too, with nematodes too, crop rotation can make a big difference. Crop rotation and companion planting. Okay. Thoughts on no dig. That is what I do. That is what I highly encourage. So if you're looking into no dig, it's basically the concept of cutting off your plants when they're spent at the soil line and not actually pulling them out, never tilling the soil. If you add amendments, you just add it on top and let them work themselves down naturally. I 100% go with that method because it allows that soil ecosystem that I've been talking about this whole time to develop. When we constantly go in there and dig and till and everything like that, it just, every single time we're ripping that ecosystem apart, and then they have to put themselves back together again. It disturbs fungal growth. It just disturbs the entire thing. So no-till or it's a wonderful way to go. And people say, well, how do you plant the plants? If you dig your small hole for your plant, if it's a start, or the seeds take up almost, you barely disturb soil at all. Most of those are going to be within a 1/4 inch of the top soil. So it's not so much of an impact. But yeah, you just try to minimally disturb it. Yes, if you have starts, you'll have to disturb it a little bit, but just minimally will do the trick in allowing that ecosystem to function and thrive. Okay, so I think that was finally all of the questions we got answered. Thank you all for coming out. And like I said, just take a look out for that email, and I will have future webinars and events coming up. So make sure to check out my website, which will have events listed, but the best place to look is on Facebook or Instagram for regular updates on different events coming up. Thank you all for joining me, and have a beautiful day.